I did always want to be a writer. I think when I was little, I used to, tell my mother, write these stories down, and then I'd illustrate them. So I think, I don't know. I think when I do school visits, I often tell kids, the things that you naturally gravitate to when you're younger, sometimes that's a clue, that of what you're supposed to do with your life. I mean, maybe you're a really good listener and you're the one friend that everyone comes to for advice. Maybe you'd be an excellent therapist, or, my son loves to put things together with Legos and string and stuff, future engineer. I don't know. So, yes, I always wanted to be a writer. And when I was in 5th grade, my school held a writing competition. We used to have the science fair every year. And full disclosure, I wasn't a science or math kid, but I was a writer. And so instead of having the science fair, they did this writing fair this one time in 5th grade. And I wrote this book, Mystery at Grandma's. I typed it, illustrated it. I wasn't the best artist, but there it is. And it ended up winning the fair. And I went to a K through 8th grade school. So my little 5th grade book even beat, the middle schoolers, which I was shocked by. And the prize was that my book got to live in the school library for a year. And you can see the little checkout. That's how we did it in the olden days, right? And I used to go into the library and look, when it was there, and I would pull the card out and I would see that people had checked it out and read it, people that I didn't know. And it was such a rush. And I think it kind of, sparked this journey for me. Here's my first author photo. Look at those glasses, I don't know. It's a little less glamorous than the photograph in my parents' backyard taken by my cousin, but I don't know, not by much. So here is my newest book, Bad Girls Never Say Die. And this book is an outsider's reimagining. I'll talk a little bit about it in the next slide, sort of my journey to writing this story. But to give you the elevator pitch, it is about a young girl named Evie Barnes. She is 15 years old. The book is set in my beloved hometown of Houston in 1964. Evie lives sort of on the wrong side of the tracks. And she runs with a group of girls who are considered bad because they wear lots of heavy eye makeup and cut class and run around with boys. And so Evie, is a bad girl. And she looks down on the girls from the right side of the tracks, the rich girls from the River Oaks neighborhood, until one evening at the local drive-in, one of those girls, a young woman named Diane, who is from the right side of the tracks, comes to Evie's rescue at a very critical and scary moment in Evie's life. And this sparks a journey between these two girls that involves murder and running away and hiding from the police and a bunch of other stuff. It's very, hopefully, a fast-paced plot with characters that jump off the page that I hope you'll fall in love with. And it's about deep and meaningful friendship. And it's also about secrets, because as Evie comes to discover, Diane is hiding quite a few secrets. And when she reveals them to Evie, Evie is forced to realize that just because someone's from the right side of the tracks, their life hasn't always been easy. So this is Bad Girls Never Say Die. And you may be thinking, this sounds familiar, right? In some ways. And if that's the case, maybe you're thinking about The Outsiders. I have a feeling many of you probably have read this book in school. And when I was in 6th grade, this was, my best friend, Lisa, recommended it to me. She said, "Oh my gosh, you've got to read The Outsiders. It's so good." And so I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And I had a science test the next day. I was a very dutiful student. But instead of studying for the science test, I read The Outsiders in one night. And I don't regret failing that science test. But I fell in love with the book, fell in love with the characters, fell in love with everything about it. Of course, I watched the movie. And then many years later, I became an English teacher. And even though now I teach high school, I teach 10th and 11th grade, I started off in middle school. And my very first year in the classroom, I was told, okay, well, this is the class you're teaching. And by the way, you teach The Outsiders. And I was pumped, of course, because I remembered how much I loved the book. And my students, all these years later, after I had read it, fell in love with it too. But one thing that occurred to me as I was teaching it was that there were not that many female characters. And my publicist, Brittany, who introduced me, will be happy that I'm mentioning this part of my journey. I was a first-year teacher. Like, I didn't, always know what I was doing. And I was trying to come up with lessons that would be engaging. And so I came up with the idea of asking my students to write what I now know is fan fiction. I didn't realize that at the time. I didn't really understand that there was this whole world of fanfic. This was 17 years ago, like the internet, it wasn't all over there yet, And so I asked my kids, hey, you could try to write a scene from the other character's point of view, or from, what happens next, or take a minor character and blow it up, And I decided, I never shared it with my students because I was too shy, but I decided, in The Outsiders, we know a lot about the greaser boys, right? We know a lot about the socius, including Cherry, the one girl in the book. She's a soc, the rich kids. But the greaser girls really aren't in the book. There's a very brief mention of them. They're not even on the page characters, it's just a mention. And so I decided, maybe I can kind of come up with a world for them. And I ended up writing some fan fiction that centered greaser girls. And that really was the first fiction that I had written since I was young. I was a journalism major, and I worked as a journalist before I became an English teacher and then a novelist for teenagers. But this fanfic was the first time I had written fiction as a grown-up. And I was like, hey, this is kind of fun. Maybe I could do this. And it really was a seed for this career that I've built for myself. And I'm so grateful to The Outsiders for giving me that opportunity. And this really was the seed for Bad Girls Never Say Die. Now, Bad Girls is not a retelling. It is a whole new plots, a whole new, different characters. It's a reimagining, is what I like to say. But there are little winks and nods. There's the drive-in and other things where I try to, pay homage to one of my favorite books of all time. So I did want to take a minute and talk about my process, right? I put this in quotes because is it really a process? Sometimes it feels more of just like a chaotic undertaking. But my book process involves certain steps that I tend to do no matter what I'm writing. I do a lot of research for my novels. My history as a journalist has helped me. When I wrote my novel Afterward, which is about surviving long-term sexual abuse, I interviewed mental health folks that really helped me understand how to craft that. When I wrote The Liars of Mariposa Island, which is based on my mother's journey as an unaccompanied minor coming here from Cuba as an unaccompanied minor, I researched the Cuban Revolution. I interviewed my mother and other people. And then with Bad Girls, I had to do quite a bit of research into what it was like to grow up in Houston in the early 60s. And so I took a bunch of senior citizens out to lunch. This was before the pandemic, and, pick their brains about what was it like to be a teenager back then. And while some things definitely have changed, a lot of things have actually stayed the same for better or worse. And so I went to the downtown library. I was digging through old yearbooks. So there's a research component. I do a lot of talking. I talk to friends. I talk to my editor. I talk things out. And I sometimes do a lot of crying because the writing process can be difficult and overwhelming at times, right? I make outlines, and this is my, again, quote unquote, organized outline. This is actually my outline for my very first novel, The Truth About Alice. And this is actually a neater one. But I'm very old school. I do a lot of outlining on paper and pencil. A lot of folks like to use programs like Scrivener, which I think is awesome. But for me, I'm still pencil paper. And so you can see that I adjust. And often as I'm writing, sometimes I will sort of cross things out that I've written to kind of feel like I'm getting somewhere. And then this is what we call an edit letter. So I teach, as I mentioned, high school. I'm currently teaching 10th grade English 2, and I also teach AP language. So I'm getting those kids ready for the AP exam. And, I return their essays with my marks and writing all over it. And, they roll their eyes and they get frustrated. And I often want to show them, you think this is bad. Here is this is what a revision letter looks like when you're a novelist. So this is my edit letter for my third book, Afterward. And if you look where it says Roaring Brook Press, that's the first page there on the top left. Those first few lines, like 3 or 4 lines, are everything that my editor liked about the book. And everything else is what I need to change, right? And so the process of writing can be, overwhelming. The first draft is a lot of fun for me because I live in this fantasy that it's perfect, right? But there is no such thing as a perfect first draft. In fact, the books you have on your shelves, right, are some of the most revised and redone writing out there, because that's what is involved in making a novel the best it can be. And so, I have to be open, right? I have to be willing to hear criticism. And that's hard sometimes when you've put your heart and your soul into the process and you've cried and you've done your research and you've done your outlines, And I know when I hand my students' essays back to them, sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't want to crush their spirits, right? But part of the writing process is listening to feedback that's given with a kind heart. And, the only thing a first draft has to be is done. And then you get to the work of the revising. I thought this would be fun for some of you to see. This is the draft of The Liars of Mariposa Island, my 5th book. And you can see the back and forth that I use. This is with my editor, Kate Jacobs. The track changes, the back and forths that we do, to negotiate essentially what we're going to do with this first draft, right? So I've gotten her edit letter. I tackle some of these changes. I send her, the second draft, and then we go back and forward with track changes here to try to make the book the best that it can be. So it's a long process, but in the end, it feels really good when you get to see your books on the shelf, and you hear from readers, right, who want to thank you for what you've put out into the world. And that's a really, really good feeling. I wanted to close with a couple of pieces of advice because I also want to have time to answer your questions about the writing process, about Bad Girls Never Say Die, about the Moxie movie, whatever you would like me to talk about. But here's some advice, especially if you're interested in being a writer. I believe we should read whatever we want. No apologies. I have people tell me I have a lot of adults tell me sometimes like, oh, I only read romance novels or whatever. I'm rereading this favorite book instead of reading the bestseller that everyone's talking about. And I'm a really big believer as a writer and an English teacher that reading is reading. There's all those statistics out there about people, college graduates that like 30% of them or something don't ever read another book after they graduate or something. So I'm a real big believer that we need to read what we love. And, don't make any apologies for what you love to read, right? I'm an English teacher in my 17th year, and I know I have English teachers in the audience, right? Don't let school books ruin reading for you, right? Sometimes I have to teach books that I don't really like myself as a reader, but, I understand that there are certain books that we read in a school environment, right? And that's, helping our brains grow and our analysis muscles get stronger, right? But we need to know that that doesn't mean that that represents all reading, right? But that said, right, you want to give those school books a chance, at least once in a while. I know when it's an assigned text, sometimes we think, right? But there can be, if we give them a chance, sometimes there's something there. I'm about to start teaching The Great Gatsby after the holidays to my 11th graders, and I've really been selling them on it. So hopefully we'll have a good experience. I really advise keeping a journal. I'm a big believer, as you know, from paper and pen. So, I like keeping a handwritten journal, but, it's up to you. But I really feel not just for being a future writer, but just for your own ability to process feelings, God, through everything we're living through, sometimes keeping a journal and just spilling that stuff out can be really helpful on many levels. It helps us process things. It helps us reflect, right? And sometimes if you do want to be a writer, you get little gems, little turns of a phrase that you can then use later, right? So I love keeping a journal. I have my old journals from high school. I start every class with a free response journal time. I tell my kids, save these, right? And so I'm a big believer in journaling, stream of conscious, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about grammar. And then this is probably my biggest piece of advice, whether you want to be a writer or not. I love my phone. I'm on Instagram. I'd love for you to find me there. I am not opposed to technology. It's why we're able to visit today. But I do wonder sometimes whether or not I would be a writer today if I had grown up with a phone. Because when I was growing up, we didn't have them. And this forced me to be bored sometimes. We would take a road trip and, I couldn't read in the car because it made me car sick. So I was just forced to sit in the back of my parents' minivan with my Walkman, right? Staring out the window. And I would see, a house on the side of the freeway. And I would wonder, who lives in there? What's it like to live in a house on the side of the freeway? And I would invent a world, right? I'd be sitting in the waiting room at the dentist, right? My brother and sister are seeing the dentist. I've already been seen. I don't want to do my homework. I've read every issue of Highlights, right? That's sitting in here. So I, would sit there and I would start listening to people talking. I would listen to a parent, talking to their kid about, well, why did you fail this math test, right? Writers need to be good spies of human behavior. But I would allow myself to get bored. And that caused me to build my imagination muscle. And I would think, even if you don't want to be a writer, you just being bored and allowing your brain to wander and think is the spark of a lot of creativity. So advice for life, but really for sure, if you want to be a writer, put your phone away and get bored, which I know is so much harder to do now than it used to be. But I wanted to close with that advice. And I would love to hear your questions. I'd love to answer any that you might have. So I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully I'm doing that correctly. And yes.
Perfect. It looks like you did, Jen. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was lovely.
Great.
So I heard from a couple of you that you have students that would like to ask a question directly to Jen. Obviously, you're all in a classroom setting together, so I am happy to call you up as a teacher if you want to just have your student speak. So the way this is going to work is that I am going to invite you onto the screen. So Michelle Lettuce, I am going to invite you if you have your student Nicole Arcilla, or I don't exactly know how to pronounce her name, but we'll see if this works. If not, I also wanted to just mention that there is a little ask the question button on the bottom of the screen that you can also ask your question. Hi, guys.
Hello. Hi.
Oh my God. It's so great to see kids in the wild. Yes.
Hi, so our student had to go just to take a test, but I think we nominated someone else to ask the question. Who was
Great.
it? It's going to be Siri. What's the question?
Don't be shy.
Did you see any of yourself in your characters?
Do I see any of myself in my characters? Was that the question?
Yes.
So, I do often. I will tell you, the characters in which I see myself, this is kind of weird, are the hardest to write. The characters that are radically different from me come very easily. For example, in Bad Girls Never Say Die, Connie is the sort of like the Dallas Winston of the gang. If those of you who are Outsiders fans, she's the baddest, right? The toughest, the loudest. She's a rebel in every way. She's so bad that she has been sent away to like a juvenile detention center that really existed in Texas. And they still exist, obviously, but I named a real one that exists in Texas. And I was like a Little Miss Rule follower. In many ways, I still am sometimes. And so Connie was like, this is so easy. It was so easy to write somebody very different from myself. Characters in which I see myself, Vivian from Moxie, Joaquin from the Liars of Mariposa Island, Evie really in Bad Girls. They often are harder for me to write, which seems kind of strange, but yes, I for sure see little elements of myself in them. But the truth is, when I write fiction, the characters, I know writers say this, but it really is true. They kind of become their own people. They I don't know how to describe it, but they take on a life of their own. And I'll be typing and they will literally say or do something, and I don't know where it came from. Even the characters that sometimes are sort of based on my own feelings or experiences, and they surprise me. So a long answer, but yes, some of them are based on me in some ways, but they're often the hardest ones to write.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you so much, guys. If you have any other questions, Tammy's been adding some into the questions function here. So if you have any more, please feel free to do that as well. I'm going to close you. And then I'm going to also invite Shelly Armstrong up. I think she also has students who wanted to ask a question as well. So Shelly, I'm going to invite you to the screen now. See if this works. There we are. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Another beautiful classroom of people.
Hi.
All right, guys. We're echoing. Hold on. Okay, Isabella was going to ask a question, but it might be similar to the last question you had.
That's okay.
Yeah. Sure, her character was what, her question was, what character are you most like? Sorry. Her question was, what character are you most like? Which was similar to what you just answered.
Character that feels the most like me. In The Truth About Alice, it's Kelsey, who actually is a character that a lot of people don't like. But she's, I think, very real and honest about who she is, flaws and all. And she reminds me a lot about how I was in high school, which is that I was way too worried about what everybody thought about me all the time. Wish that I could go back in time and change that a little bit. In Devoted, I really related to the main character, Rachel. She's real curious. She's growing up in a very restrictive home, which wasn't really my experience, but she's curious about the world around her. Afterward, Ethan, and again, it's funny. I really relate. Like, I find sometimes it's a male character, sometimes it's a female character. But yeah, as I'm going through, I really find one in every single book that I kind of latch my heart onto. But again, sometimes they're the hardest ones to write. For Moxie, it was Vivian for sure. And then for Bad Girls, Evie.
Thank you so much. That was an awesome question. And there's always more to talk about. So before I close you out, do you guys have another question, or should we move on to the rest of them? One more. Okay.
Okay, here's another question. Did you ever meet the actors that were on the set of The Outsiders?
Oh, on the set of The Outsiders? No.
On the set of Moxie.
Oh, on the set of Moxie. Yeah, because my teenage girl self would have loved to have met a young Matt Dillon. But yes, I got to go to the set when they were filming in Long Beach, California. This was pre-pandemic. They flew me out there. I was so nervous. I was an extra. I played a chemistry teacher. There's like a moment about 48 minutes in, and like literally, if you blink, you will miss it, and feel free to blink. I am in the background, like just like pretending to teach chemistry, which I did not. I got a C+ in chemistry, so I shouldn't have been playing that part. But I met the actors. I met the actor that played Seth. I met the actress who played Vivian. And so, yeah, it was just amazing. And of course I met Amy, and it was just so wonderful to see this world that I had created, like, come to life. They filmed in an old high school that was no longer in use. And like they had built like a new high school, but they'd saved, because this is California, they had saved the old high school, and apparently they used it as a film set all this time. And so the high school students are like walking to class, and like there's Amy Poehler and all of these young stars like at the craft services table, and the kids are just like, I mean, I guess they grew up in California, they're just like, okay, whatever. And it was so, I was like, oh my God, this is so funny. But yeah, it was awesome to get to go to the set.
Thank you so much, guys. That was an awesome question. I'm going to close your video now. And I can confirm, Jennifer, having grown up in Los Angeles, we are not. You
saw it all.
No, it happens all the time. We have.
I would have been freaking out.
Yeah, no.
We're filming in my high school.
Yeah, I won't go on with the list of child actors that I went to high school with, but maybe that's for another day. So we have tons of questions in here that I want to get to. So I'm just going to read them out. This is from Tammy Anderson's class. It says, can you see this new book turning into a movie?
Well, I love it. I know my agent would love it too. And of course, agents are always, that's part of their job, right? The people who represent me, they try to, sell my books to film. I can see it as a movie because it is a lot of action. I wrote this book with the hope that it would be the kind of book, especially like reluctant readers, short chapters, quick, lots of action. So I can see it being a movie. Well, cross your fingers. I would love it.
So I feel like The Outsiders as a movie was fantastic. So
it's so good.
This would just be another version of that.
I'd love it. I'll call Francis Ford Coppola because he directed The Outsiders.
Sure. Get Rob Lowe to come back.
I know. And it was school kids. It was high school students that made The Outsiders into a movie. They wrote to Francis Ford Coppola in the 80s. And they were like, this book has been around. At that point, it had been out for like 20 years. And it had never been made into a film. And Francis Ford Coppola got their letter and was like, okay. And then made it the movie. So
see? The power of teenage passion.
That's right. That's right.
I love it. So see, you guys, write to Francis Ford Coppola. Tell him to get
please
Bad Girls into a movie. We'll make it happen. Alrighty, another one. So this is from Michelle's classroom. They ask, when you create a character, do you plan them out or do they come fully formed already?
Most of the time, the characters spring to life out of my head, like Athena or something, like a Greek mythology reference. Although it's been a while since I taught a Greek mythology unit, but I think it was Athena that sprung from Zeus's head.
Yes, it was Athena.
Mostly, they just come to me, like they just jump out. Occasionally, though, I will struggle. Again, the ones that kind of have a seed of me in them. Rachel in Devoted, my second novel, was a tough one to find fully. Evie in Mad Girls, I struggled with her. And sometimes when I struggle, this is a little writer tip, I like to do like a little interview. Like, what's this character's favorite word? What do they keep hidden under their bed? What's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to them? And you can find lots of these character questionnaires online, but I kind of interview them. And the first thing that sometimes stuff pops out and I'm like, oh, wow. And this stuff may not make it into the novel, but I know that it's there. And once I've done that, the character starts to take shape. But a lot of my characters just pop out. And then, and I'm a character-based writer. My characters come to me first, typically.
Awesome. And then from Christina Stark's classroom, she has two questions that I think both go really well together about process. The first one is, how do you get new ideas for your future book? And then how long did it take to write this book? And your writing process, is it the same for every book? Is it different? So can you talk about, like, from start to finish, like your writing process and how it varies from book to book?
So I'm a big believer that you should write what you're obsessed about, like what you're just intrigued about. So I'm really interested in small towns. I've never lived in one, but I'm fascinated by like what it might be like to live in one. I'm fascinated by cults. I was fascinated by Riot Girl because I was into that, right? I'm fascinated by my mother's story from coming here from Cuba as an unaccompanied minor. I was fascinated and obsessed with The Outsiders. So those are my seeds. The things that I'm just so into that it's a pleasure to think about them. And out of that come story ideas. I often, again, start with a character. Sometimes I'll flash on an image or, the writer Julie Murphy, who wrote Dumplin', who's also a Texas writer, and we're friends. She says she thinks about, and I do this too, she thinks about her stories kind of like a movie trailer, like lets it marinate. And I get like flashes of scenes. Sometimes I even have music set to these flashes and it marinates until I just have to put it on the paper. With Moxie, I flashed on this idea because I loved Riot Girl, but I knew I didn't want to set a book set in the 90s. I flashed on this idea of a girl pulling a shoebox of her mother's Riot Girl stuff out of the closet. And out of that came Moxie. So it's a mix. And then typically I'm a linear writer. You saw my outline in the presentation. I'll, outline it out. I'm a pantser plotter. I typically know the end. I know the beats. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to get from big moment to big moment to big moment. But, I typically write in a linear fashion and start to, get it that way off of an outline. Yeah. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's definitely helpful. And I think, like one of the things that I hear a lot of authors say as well is what works for one book might not work for another book, especially like your first book versus your second book.
Yes.
I think just being kind to yourself and letting your process happen, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
So we have a few more questions I definitely want to make time for.
You're welcome, Ms. Stark, by the way. Thanks.
I think this is a really interesting question because I think the publishing industry is so opaque. And so someone from Michelle's class is asking, how did you go about getting the book published in the first place from a publishing company? And I mean, this is a very, very long process, but I think, just speaking to access and entry point, it would be helpful.
So just so you know, like The Truth About Alice came out in 2014. I started trying to write young adult literature in 2007, not long after I became a teacher. So it was a 7-year process. I wrote 2 manuscripts that were good enough to get me an agent, but they never sold. And so it can be an overwhelming process. When I first started, self-publishing wasn't really a thing. Traditional publishing was the way to go. I like that I've done traditional publishing because I have wonderful people like Brittany helping get my books out into the world. But it is a real process. When I started, there was less online. This is how long ago I started. I drove to a Borders, which doesn't even exist anymore, sadly, RIP Borders. And I bought a book of 8 literary agents in New York, like a phone book. And I mailed manuscripts in the mail. And this was again, 2007. And so things have changed. I'll drop it in the chat, actually. This person was my first agent, and he's a great guy. He no longer he's no longer agent, but he keeps this website up, and it's got lots of good information about the publishing industry, self-publishing, which has come a long way, and then traditional publishing, which is what I do. What I would say, though, just one little caveat: publishing and writing, of course, they're connected, but they are different things. And when I was in high school, publishing, the internet didn't exist. It was so far away that I didn't even think about getting a book in what? I was 17. So I was writing really for myself. And I cannot encourage that enough. I get some young writers, some at the school where I work at, they have a write club. I went and spoke to them, and they're like, well, how do I get, my work? How do I get an agent? And what I would say is, you don't need to be in such a hurry. I know, because we see everything, and the internet makes it, there's more options and accessibility and stuff, which is good. But do not we're not runway models, right? As long as our brains work and we can write in some way, I didn't publish my first novel until the ancient age of 37. You do not need to be in a rush, and you do not need to be published to be a writer. And I would say that the 7 years I spent trying, in a lot of ways made me a better writer, because when I wrote The Truth About Alice, which was my first book to actually sell, I had tried to sell, and it didn't work. So I said, forget it. I'm going to write The Truth About Alice. I'm going to write the book I want to write for me. And if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. And wouldn't you know, that's the one that sold, right? Because I wrote it for myself first. As S.E. Hinton said about The Outsiders, I wrote it because I wanted to read it. So you need to write what you want to read, not what you think is going to sell. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was perfect.
Good.
And then I think we have time for one more question before we wrap this up. And of course, it's a perfect question, which is, do you have any plans for any new books?
Oh, I love being asked that. I have recently finished the first draft, which for right now, I'm in that wonderful world where I pretend that it's perfect, even though we all know it's not, right? I'm waiting to hear back from my editor. It's tentatively titled Down Came the Rain. And it is set here in Houston, where I live, in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. I think I have a school from Galveston on this call. And so you guys are local folks, Hurricane Harvey devastated the Houston area and beyond. It rained for literally 4 days. I had maybe literally 25 to 30 friends whose homes were flooded out. It devastated this city. And it traumatized the city, including many of my students. I was fortunate that my house did not flood, but many of my students lost their homes. And I hear my students talk about climate change all the time. It's on their minds. It's right here. It's right here for me too. I'm a mother. And so in Down Came the Rain, I am trying to explore all of this. And it's told in dual POV, a young woman and a young man. The young woman's school floods. Yes, Crenshaw, I know. Oh, well, I hope you like this one, Christina. The young woman's school floods out, and they're pushed and forced to share a space with another high school, which actually happened here in Kingwood and some other places. And so these two schools have to share a space, and these two students get to know each other. They start a climate change group, kind of like Moxie for climate change, maybe I could say. But I'm trying to explore this because it's an existential threat that I know is on my mind and is on the minds of the young people that I teach. So not sure when that's going to be out, but that's what I'm working on.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I think that speaks to, again, just like where you get your inspiration. You get your inspiration from everywhere, like what's on your mind. And then you let your curiosity take you where you want to go. And I think that's awesome. All right, let me jump on here really quickly just to... Hi, everyone.
And I just want to thank everybody for coming today. And I apologize for the echo at the beginning. I'm so glad I was able to get my headphones, and Brittany suggested that. So I just want to thank everybody for coming and spending time with me. And to the teachers out there, you're heroes. This year is a tough one, just like last year was tough. And from someone who's still in the trenches with you, I'm really grateful for you. So thank you for all you're doing for your students.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I just want to echo all of that. Thank you so much